I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol this week on Senate Spotlight. After working for nearly 16 hours straight, the Minnesota legislature has passed a budget.
We had to find our way forward, and there were really strong compromises, and some that I'm really proud of and some that are very painful for me.
Minnesota doesn't have an infinite pot of money that we can reach into and pay for programs.
Senate leadership discusses the details of the budget bills, what it took to keep the government open, and their priorities for next session. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
It took tough decisions and meaningful compromise, but the pressure to avoid a future deficit while navigating competing priorities helped forge new relationships in the Senate this session. These efforts have produced a balanced budget and a stable foundation for the Senate and the state of Minnesota to build on moving forward. Joining me now is someone who knows this process firsthand, Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy. Senator, thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this session has been described as being one of a kind. Do you agree with that, or why not?
Yes, it is one of a kind, in part because of the way we started. A tie in the House, a fight in the House, a tie as a result of the loss of Senator Carrie Dietzick, may her memory be a blessing, and a power sharing agreement, and the election of Donald Trump. I think all of those contributed to this being a one of a kind, for me, the most difficult session of the 18 that I have been a part of.
This session was a budget session, and so that's mainly what things focused on, but that jargon can be confusing when we talk about money in the tails or structural imbalance, planning years reserve. So is there a way to plainly say what was done this session?
Yep. Let me do my best here. In Minnesota, we look not just for 2, but for 4 years. In those last 2 years, we call the planning years, sometimes people call them the tails. Our job is to balance the budget constitutionally for the next 2 years, so for 26 and 27. But because we've adopted fiscal disciplinary planning practices, we look out for 4. And if we look out to the end of those 4 years, if we were on the same trajectory in the budget, we would see a structural imbalance or the start of a budget deficit. We count it with inflation and without inflation. Without inflation is about $2.4 billion. And we, the Senate DFLers, wanted very much to cut that. We wanted to reduce that. And it was a key part of our targets that we set and a key part of the budget negotiations. And we lined up with Governor Walz to say, when we go into this budget, we want to reduce that structural imbalance in those out years to give us and Minnesotans a stable budget that we can plan on. We did that. We cut it nearly in half through the course of this, and it required both spending reductions, cuts, which we've done, and the raising of revenue, which we've done. So we cut probably overall about $1.3 billion out of this budget, and we raised about $800 million over 4 years to get us to the point of reducing that structural imbalance while protecting the things that Minnesotans count on that come from the state's budget, whether it is care for seniors, people with disabilities, our health care coverage, our public schools, our communities, and we invested in things like infrastructure and jobs, water, roads, bridges, and our state parks. I am proud of what we've accomplished, though it was hard fought and filled with hard compromises.
Yeah, you've said that you're proud of the budget. So what are some of those things that you're most proud of that you guys were able to get done?
I come from a healthcare background, and 2 of the most challenging budgets for us were the Human Services budget and the Health and Human Services budget. And both of the chairs in these cases, Senator Wickland and Senator Hoffman, did extraordinary work protecting our interests, whether it is nursing homes, group homes for people with disabilities, the people who work, caring for people who are aging, caring for people with disabilities, did extraordinary work. And Senator Wickland making sure there was additional funding put into primary care with our federally qualified health centers, more funding for our hospitals, more funding for mental health, more funding for pharmacies across the state. Those are 2 really important places. And then let me just mention Senator Kunish and the work that she and others did on education. Public schools and our kids are something that everybody across the state supports and agrees with, and that was a key priority for us, and we did very well there as well.
So how do you respond then when Senate Republicans make the argument that this budget doesn't put Minnesotans first?
Well, they can make their own argument. We went into this session knowing we had to balance the budget, and because we're in the majority, that's our primary job. And I was happy to have Leader Johnson along with us in those negotiations. He stepped back for a while. It is difficult to balance the budget when you want to address what could be a deficit in the out years. But we're responsible people, just like Minnesotans are with their own pocketbooks. And we did that hard job, and we did it protecting the core interests of the people of Minnesota. And let me add that there were a number of policy provisions that we adopted in 2023 that put more money into people's pockets. We protected all of that as well.
Despite your personal feelings on the matter, you gave your word that you would help the Senate Republican caucus pass its repeal of Minnesota Care for undocumented adults. Talk me through what was at stake if you didn't agree to do that.
You can tell when you enter into a negotiation what your negotiating partners value the most. And it was very clear from the start that eliminating coverage for people who are not documented in Minnesota was the chief priority for the Republicans, both House and Senate. And we, over the course of many, many weeks, offered many things that was of interest, stated interest to the Republicans, whether it was significant changes to paid family medical leave, significant changes in non-compete, significant changes to earn sick and save time, things that we value and are important to Minnesotans. Over the course, more than one time, over the course of days of negotiation, and then again right before the end of session, we came back to that provision again. And we offered many iterations of the ways in which we could mitigate the harm, hardship, protecting seniors, et cetera. There was a no, a no, a no. And what was important for us, again, as the responsible parties, was not taking us to a government shutdown. A government shutdown, I've been through that before, doesn't get you a better result, and it hurts a lot of people. It hurts the state of Minnesota. So that was the leverage point. That was the challenge. It's the most painful vote I've taken. I don't support it, but when you reach a conclusion and you give your word, you have to follow through with that. And it is something that I think we have to question. I think, from my perspective, I believe that the political calculus on the part of the Republicans is wrong. I think they think Minnesotans will think this is okay. I disagree. I think Minnesotans, when asked, what does it mean to sever health care from a group of people because of who they are or because of their status? I think they'll say that's not right.
Senator, something else that happened in between the regular session and the special session were working groups to make those budget deals. And there's been some commentary on the working groups saying that they were a little less transparent. And you yourself have said that the legislature needs to be dragged back into the habit of transparency. So what can we do to achieve that?
You know, since I've started serving the legislature to now, the work of conference committees, the last step of legislating, members of the House and the Senate together making final decisions on a proposal and, compromising between the two, those often were very public in my early years. I think the first conference committee I served on was the Freedom to Breathe, and it was exciting and exhilarating to make that policy change. We have moved away from that significantly, and that practice spilled into the working groups. The working groups are informal, but they replicate a conference committee, not so much done in public. And there will always be the case that some of the negotiations that happen in the art of compromise do require one-on-one conversation. They're not all conducted in public, but much more of the work used to be conducted in public. And I am really hoping and pushing the legislature to restore that practice so Minnesotans can participate fully along with us.
Mentioning the art of compromise, reflecting back on this session, you had said you didn't necessarily learn the art of bipartisanship, but what it means to engage and compromise. So what is the difference there?
Well, often you'll hear people say, like Minnesotans will say, we just want you to work together. We want you to get along. I get that. They don't want us to be the pains in their back ends that we can be sometimes. And we will often cover the disagreement with this idea of bipartisanship. So if there are Democrats and Republicans supporting something, therefore it must be good. But Democrats and Democrats disagree, and Republicans disagree, and House and Senate disagree. And finding real compromise among us is much more challenging than the blanket of there's bipartisan support here. And that became much more clear to me this session because we're so narrowly divided. We had to find our way forward. And there were really strong compromises, and some that I'm really proud of and some that are very painful for me. And that is the result of who Minnesotans sent into the legislature, so we should see more of that. But I do want to praise the compromisers, the people who put above their own stated personal goals the value of finding a solution for the people of Minnesota. That takes a keen intellect, it takes some humility, I think it takes a commitment to the people of Minnesota, and that is how we should legislate. And for those who did that work, I say, good job.
Senator, those compromises, do you think that's what helped foster a better relationship with Senate Republicans this session?
I think what helped us foster a better relationship this session was the early outreach and agreement to do power sharing when we lost Carrie Dietzich. That created a space for us to talk about how we would do power sharing, and in that, we were able to talk a lot about how people felt in the last 2 years when there was Democratic power in both chambers with the governor, and what that meant for Republicans and how they responded to that. So understanding each other better and what was motivating one another in the last session helped us build something different this session. And I'm really grateful for Mark Johnson. He's a good walking partner. He is straightforward with me, and I am straightforward with him. So are our teams. And that has also helped us navigate this session, a difficult one, in the way I think Minnesotans would want us to.
It seems like there were a lot of lessons learned in the Senate this session. So what is a message that you would want to leave with Minnesotans about the session?
I would want Minnesotans, the ones who are glad we're done, the ones who feel like something important happened, and the ones who are deeply disappointed. I would want them to know that, from my perspective, the lives of Minnesotans, all of them, were deeply considered in the decisions that were made, and nothing was made lightly. I've had a couple of people say to me that I was trading away people's lives. Nothing could be further from the truth. I want Minnesotans to know that many of us here who are elected are here to serve the people of Minnesota with their lives and their communities and their families at the center of our decision making. And I want them to know that even in tough situations, and we are living in a period where Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress are shoveling at us chaos, uncertainty, and a lot of threatening policies, that despite that, we're going to put Minnesotans' interests at the center of our decision making. Our caucus is going to do that. I'm going to do that. And we're going to continue to do that important work for the people of Minnesota, because here in Minnesota, our government's not broken. We can make this work for the people.
Senator, speaking of moving Minnesota forward, the next session doesn't convene until February 2026, and it's going to be policy focused. So what are the main priorities for your caucus?
Well, I want to say that we could end up in a special session if Congress takes the deadly actions that they're talking about in cutting Medicaid or SNAP, two really important efforts that serve the people of Minnesota. I'm really worried about that. And then I think about February 17th, and I'm glad, we have a little bit of time, perhaps at the end of the year before we get started. There were a lot of policy issues that members were working on that got left behind in order to pass a budget. So I'm sure members are going to come back to those policy questions, and they should. And they should use the interim to build support for the ones that are challenging. And in some cases, we've set up structures to do that. The other thing that I hope we do is a bonding bill. We can bond for about $1.1 billion next session. And there's a long list of projects in communities across the state. And the question, I think, for my colleagues across the aisle will be, are they willing to do another bonding bill? And what would they leverage in order to get that done? Unfortunately, it's become the coin of this realm that we're going to extract things from people in order to get a bonding bill done, and we shouldn't do that. So policy, bonding, and hopefully no more budget. Hopefully the budget's stably done.
I think we can agree to that. All right, Senator, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Some of the bills taken up during the special session had an easier time passing than others. For instance, Senate File 9, the Legislative Corrections Bill, sailed through the Senate.
There being 58 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed.
But House File 9, the Omnibus Tax Bill, passed by just one vote.
It is a major tax increase.
To find out how your senator voted on which bill, all you have to do is visit senate.mn. From there, click on the link for 2025 First Special Session Omnibus Bills. From there, you can click on the bill you're interested in, then head to the Authors and Status page, and then read the Senate Journal entry to see how your senator voted. You can also watch the debate from the floor on each bill in full and see the voting board light up as votes are cast via our Senate Media YouTube channel. Just look for the 2025 First Special Session playlist. With me now to reflect on the end of session is Senate Minority Leader Mark Johnson. Senator, welcome back to Senate Spotlight.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So you're somewhat fresh off of that all-nighter. You guys worked well past midnight to pass the budget. How did that feel?
Well, it kind of in two different ways. So number one, it's a relief to be done with the session. Who knew when this was actually going to end? And so it was nice to have an actual finishing point. The part that doesn't make me feel so good is just what substantively was passed. I mean, it was things that Senate Republicans, for the most part, did not agree with. There were a number of items within the bill that we can talk about later that, we would have significantly different priorities. And so that part of it was kind of a downer for a lot of us in the Senate Republican caucus.
Something else that was mentioned a lot about this special session was that it was such a small time window, the one-day special session from 10 a.m. Monday, and it was scheduled to go to 7 a.m. on Tuesday. Fortunately, it wrapped before then, but that didn't leave a lot of time for discussion, debate, or adding amendments. And there was some pushback from members because of that. So, can you talk to me about the decision to have a one-day special session? How did that come about?
Yeah, and so that was a decision that was made with the leadership and with the governor's office itself. Look, a lot of the ideas within those particular bills have been discussed throughout session, and so from the beginning of January for the Republican, for the Senate, a little bit later in February on the House side. But a lot of those ideas had been kind of vetted before. How they were packaged up was new, of course, to all of us. And so as we looked through those bills, we were able to identify the policies and the issues within that. So one day we were able to get through it, and you saw we didn't need to take the full amount of time that was allocated. So we were able to end by 2 o'clock in the morning. And it feel like we got through the bills pretty well. However, we heard a lot from the public, though, that, look, we didn't get a chance to really dig into that and see what was in it and what wasn't. So even as we were sitting on the floor, we have constituents and other interested groups texting us, hey, where is this? What is that? So the process leading up to that, when the bills were actually debated on the floor, you saw a lot of behind closed doors negotiations. And then all of a sudden they pop out like, Moses off the mountain with here's the new bill. And I think that took a lot of people by surprise, including myself.
Yeah. You said that you didn't agree with the budget. Take me through some of those major concerns that you had.
Well, there's a lot in it. Again, this is another budget that's not focused on Minnesotans, not putting the priorities of Minnesotans first. I'll give you an example. So our agencies grew by $770 million, not for their programs, not for things like that, but for their operating expenses. And so when you have nursing homes who are right on the edge, a lot of them went throughout our communities that are on the edge of closing, and they cut their pay by $161 million. And on top of that, they raised taxes on those facilities. Well, that's putting those people in harm's way while we're protecting government and bureaucracy. Which to me is something that is completely backwards. And the other items are education is an area we're looking that the governor is going to end up ultimately cutting. Those are not what Minnesotans want to have happen. That's not the priorities of Minnesota. And so we got to make sure that we're focusing back on people, on communities, on the things that are really important to this state.
To get the budget across the finish line this year, you made a deal with Senate Majority Leader Aaron Murphy. Talk to me about what was in that deal and why was it necessary?
Sure. So we didn't agree and we did not sign off on the budget deal. So think of things like taxes, on HHS, on education. Again, they were not focused on Minnesotans, and so I would not sign off on that. The Senate Republicans would not sign off on those deals. What we did sign off on was a bonding bill that really focused on roads, bridges, drinking water, those infrastructure things that Minnesotans need across the states. That was a big deal. The other thing that we did was help small businesses with some earned safe and sick time relief on that. There's issues within that program that we really needed to address, and I think we got some refinements within earned safe and sick time. And also investing in the data center industry too. That's something that's going to be a big impact and a big driver in our economics in this state going forward. And we may need to make sure that we could make it so that we're competitive at least. So it's not a disadvantage to come to Minnesota. And so that's kind of some of the ideas that we did. And in order to do that, we were signed off on that secondary deal.
Another priority and success for your caucus in this special session was repealing Minnesota Care for undocumented adults. Critics during the debate said that it doesn't save the state money and that it can lead to worse health outcomes for some. So how do you respond to some of those criticisms?
First of all, I mean, it clearly saves the state money. And again, when you're looking through the spreadsheets themselves, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that go out for undocumented alien health care. So we were able to curtail that in a way that we were able to balance it, but we still have some work to do within that program. But that idea that it doesn't save money, Minnesota doesn't have an infinite pot of money that we can reach into and pay for programming. So do we want to put Minnesota students first? Do we want to put Minnesota nursing facilities first? Do we want to take care of our communities and our infrastructure across the state? Or do we want to incentivize illegal aliens coming into the state and offering them free health care, free education, those things? We have to make decisions and priorities, and that's what this is about.
Okay. Speaking of compromise and making deals, it was said that negotiating with the House was particularly difficult this session. For example, there was the idea here in the Senate of the creation of the Office of the Inspector General, which was popular with both caucuses, but it was dismissed by the House. So how would you characterize how those negotiations went across the body? And do you think the Senate had to mediate or compromise more than usual?
Yeah, I think a lot of the compromise happened in the House just because that's where they had to do a lot of compromising to get bills past the House floor. The OIG, I think, that was one that wasn't supported by the governor. And then also it ran into some issues over on the House side, which, for most, again, going back to Minnesotans and their priorities, when you see the fraud and the wasted taxpayer dollars, this is something that was pretty common sense. Why don't we have more accountability within government? And we see that being rejected one more time. It was pretty difficult to watch that bill in particular go down when we know that the need for it is so great in this state.
Speaking of accountability, amongst your members, a concern was voiced during the special session about the working groups and how they were managed. Yeah. Talk to me about how that happened.
So for us, it's interesting that we have the first 2/3 of the legislative session, because you see these bills and people are talking about bipartisanship and kumbaya and we're going to have this open process. When we get right down to that last third of the year, all of a sudden doors begin to close and things start happening behind the curtain. And we really saw that with these working groups. We had members within our caucus who expected to be in those discussions and bring their viewpoint and the needs of their constituents to those working groups. And yet they were completely shut out of those. And so we really had an issue with the way that we were disrespected within the working groups, and our constituents were disrespected within that, because we represent a great deal of people. Especially when we're only one seat in the minority. So that was a huge concern for us in how that whole special session worked out.
Yeah, you just mentioned that bipartisanship was a big conversation talking point in the beginning of the session. We talked about that your first time here. Do you think that the Senate was successful in fostering that perhaps throughout the session, maybe just not at the end, or it was just an idea that could still be developed?
So I was really excited about that. I know we talked about it early on too. We had that power sharing agreement, and we had to have, chairs were working together, discussing what committee was going to look like, what bills they were going to be hearing. Their staff were working very closely together within that. And I think we saw some fruits of that through the year, even when Democrats took back full control of the Senate and those committees were no longer co-chaired. There was still a working relationship in most of the committees throughout the session that I think brought some fruit later on. Some trust was built across the aisle there too in that way. I hope that we can continue that trend. The Senate has always been one of those places where Republicans and Democrats will go to each other's office and sit down and talk about things that they're seeing. And so I'm hoping that we get back there. We haven't seen that much, especially over the last 2 years prior to this session. Hopefully we get back there more and build those relationships.
Going back to the beginning of the session again, we knew it was going to be a budget session, so we knew some things were coming. We started off with a couple uncertainties. There was that power sharing agreement, which was new. And then kind of the things, like, we continued to get surprises throughout the session.
Yeah.
So would you say that it played out mostly the way you expected it to, or were there other things that surprised you?
I mean, every week there was a new surprise, it seemed like, whether we were in majority or, power sharing, or the House was, what was going on over the House, depending on the special election that was happening that week. So it was always back and forth. So it was really a roller coaster of a session, things happening that never expected. But at the end of the day, the institution of state government continues to roll. And here we are before the end of the month, and we have a budget done. Now, we don't agree with the budget per se, but the reality is we did finish it. And so it kind of speaks to, it doesn't matter what's going on, the consternation within it, it still continues to roll, and we get to the end, and here we are done.
It must be nice to be able to get off the roller coaster for a little bit.
Yeah, it's a huge relief. But I think members really need to take some time, because even in Congress, they'll take a couple-week break here and there and do that. But for us, we get in January, and for the most part, we're here every week, except for around Easter. Maybe we'll have a week off, and just be hammering through these issues. So to get to the end, I think, is a big relief. Have members go back to the communities. It gets to be such an echo chamber here of issues and things that when you get back, you're like, oh, well, people don't know about this inside thing here. They care about this. And so it's very, very important to get there and just hear from constituents.
If you could leave constituents with one thought, one idea about this session, what would that be?
I think this session really shows the importance of staying in tune of what's actually going on, not listening to the talking points or things, but actually digging within the story, reaching out to your legislator, Republican, Democrat, whoever it may be, and just talking them through what's happening here. When that distance happens, all of a sudden legislators become disconnected from the real needs of Minnesotans. And so I'm hoping that more people will reach out and have that communication with their legislator. It's just so critical.
Senator, thank you so much for your time here.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. With the end of session comes the end of Senate Spotlight's time on your TV screen. For now, we'll be back on your local public television station when the Senate's next session begins. But that doesn't mean we won't be working to keep you informed throughout the interim. We'll be reporting on the new legislation that passed this session and taking a closer look at how it will impact Minnesotans. You can find our latest projects on our Senate Media YouTube channel and on our social media pages. But for now, thank you for tuning in this session. See you next time.